Welcome everyone. Welcome back to those of you who have come to some of the previous sessions, and welcome to you if this is the first one. I'm Simon Walker, I'm Director of Training at Maxon, and we're delighted to have again with us the wonderful Chad Perkins. Hi Chad.
Hey Simon, how you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. And on my screen here, we've just got a list of the webinars we've been running this week. And we're on to the third one here, which is some more tricks inside cinema and transferring things over to After Effects. And I believe also a few little tricks in using compositing tools like Supercomp. Hi Celio, welcome. Good to see you again. Excellent. Thank you for coming to so many of these, by the way. And a couple of housekeeping things. We'll get started in about 1 minute, but I just wanted to remind everyone that the sorry, Celia's putting me off with jokes and stuff on the chat. Thank you. But we're recording these. You'll see that's recording already, and you'll get a link to the recording automatically. And this PDF, if you click on the previous sessions, you get a link to the actual recordings, even though it's the registration link. That's what we try and do. And if you're interested, next week we've all got more webinars, and that's, if I move this down the screen here, I'll put this in the link too, but we've got a whole series of webinars every Monday at 9 AM Pacific, but you can dial in from wherever you are, talking about all sorts of different disciplines with guest presenters each month as well. So I'll be hosting them, but we'll be inviting people in for lots of different techniques. Fantastic. Great. So let's hand over to you, Chad. Let me switch over my settings so you can share your screen.
Okay, there we go.
Fantastic.
Beautiful.
And if you are attending here and you can hear us and you can see Chad's screen, which says Cineware versus AEC, which I think is a very interesting topic, please just give us a shout out on the questions box, make sure the technology is working, and then we're good to go. I can see it, put it that way. So.
Okay, well then it's.
Oh, thanks, Alexander. Thanks, Celio. Yes, it's working. Excellent. Cool. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Michael. Right, we're good to go. I'm going to turn off my webcam for a bit. And feel free, everyone, to answer questions, because we've got the ever-patient Darren on the questions pod, researching stuff and adding links and also answering questions. So thanks again for doing this, Darren. And so over to you, Chad.
All right, thanks so much. Welcome, everybody, to this final webinar in this series all week. And we're going to be talking about compositing, getting stuff from Cinema 4D into After Effects. And we're specifically going to be looking at Cineware and also, which is kind of like a newish workflow, right? And then also AEC, the old AEC workflow, because I find that there's a lot of value in the old AEC workflow as well. Just a quick aside about the AEC workflow. In order for this to work, you're going to need to go to your applications folder, program files on Windows, and then inside of the Maxon directory, you're going to find a folder called Exchange Plugins, and then navigate to your application of choice, After Effects in my case here. We go to the importer, pick your operating system, and then your version, and then you can unzip this and it will create, I believe, a .plugin file for Mac and a .aex for PC, I think. And then you could put that in the plugins folder in After Effects. And you'll need to do that in order to get this workflow to work. I think the Adobe folks are putting a lot of resources into Cineware, and they kind of want to push you into Cineware because it's like this cool feature that only they have and such. But there are some drawbacks to it. And so let's talk about that. We're going to be spending the whole day again getting into Cineware versus AEC, and then we're going to bring our composites into After Effects and look at Supercomp to composite all this stuff together and a few other little tricks as well. That's the outline for the day. But let's talk about Cineware versus AEC. Almost always Cineware is faster. As we've been looking at all week, you just bring in a native C4D file right into After Effects. You don't have to render anything, just drag and drop it. And so it's going to be faster. With AEC, in order to use AEC, typically, you need to render everything in Cinema 4D, and then it brings your renders into After Effects in an already made project. So almost always the AEC workflow is going to be more reliable and predictable, because a lot of times, and I'll show you an example in just a second, when you're in Cineware, a lot of times you have geometry that doesn't come over right, or sometimes you use like align to spline. We'll look at the align to spline tag in Cinema 4D. It doesn't come over correctly, and so there's times where just Cineware doesn't work correctly. But when you render stuff out, obviously it's going to be the way you expect it. So AEC is a little bit more reliable. And so a lot of times, like on online stuff, I see people saying like, well, I don't like using Cineware because it's not as good as blank. And it's not like that. It doesn't have to be this kind of like dichotomy where like you use one or the other. From my experience, again, this is just my thing, but what I found is that each one has their strengths. You can't beat the speed of Cineware. Just dragging and dropping a Cinema 4D project into After Effects is insane. So yes, it's not super reliable 100% of the time, but it's amazing you could just do that. So there are values to using it, and we'll look at that, because a lot of times if they pitch it sometimes, the advertising folks, they pitch it like it's this kind of like solution, this one-stop solution. This is the new way. And in reality, it's not a perfect solution for bigger projects like the one that we're going to look at today. It's not. Cineware isn't the ultimate solution, but it still can help. So you can use both to help out. So again, Cineware can be slow and unreliable, but you can use layers and multipass to have it be beneficial to you throughout your workflow and make things more efficient. So again, I recommend getting out of this mentality that Cineware is like the one-stop solution, especially if you use more complex stuff in Cinema 4D. Cineware is not going to be this kind of like magic bullet that fixes, everything in one stop, but it can create some stuff. So here is the project that I made in Cinema 4D and then rendered out, and I played with Cineware the whole time to bring this in. So there's animation, and the audio cuts out because go to webinar and all that stuff. My son composed this music for this thing, which is, it's a bummer you can't hear it because it's like really cool. It goes with it really well. But we have this kind of like glowing triangle. We have these guys reaching out. We have haze in the background and fog. And this is all kind of like blending together really nicely. We have some astounding blending of this triangle, this like glowing triangle with this particular smoke. And you look at it and we have the pink glow on top of the particular, but then sometimes it seems that the particular is like on top of the triangle, and then it also seems like it's behind it. And how is that possible? We'll look at that. Just very quickly here. Here is like what we started with in Cinema 4D, or here's what we're going to start with in Cinema 4D. This is like our raw material, the raw render coming from Cinema 4D. So all of this stuff, that's probably hard to see on my screen because it's like probably much tinier there. So this is the raw render, and then this is what we were able to turn it into with compositing passes and Supercomp and the whole bit. And we're using global illumination here, and so the scene kind of blends together nicely. When you have a regular composite where you're not building the whole scene in Cinema, then you're gonna have to worry about like color grading and all that kind of stuff to make sure the elements match. And that's already kind of done for us, but still we're able to kind of bring some nice flourishes in here to make these objects in the scene play together nicely, and also give us some flexibility in post after the fact. Okay, so let's hop on over to Cinema and let's talk about some of these tricks, some of the Cineware, get into the nitty gritty of Cineware and AEC stuff. So one thing that I'm going to talk about, just cover right off the bat, this totally doesn't fit here, but I'm realizing that I forgot to mention it this morning. And so I'm gonna go ahead and with nothing selected, I'm gonna press Command D or Control D on the PC in Cinema 4D, and that gives me my project settings. Now, in the latest version of Cinema, that's S22, if you have a subscription, they've changed the Cineware project settings. This used to be a global preference that you'd have to go into like the preferences in Cinema and then set this up here. And then that would be the case for all projects that you use, universally. Now they've made it so it's a per project basis. So I could go to the Cineware tab and I have some Cineware options here. I haven't found that in the stuff that we're doing today that these options have made a difference, but you can save a polygon cache, an animation cache, and a material cache so that the information is kind of like stored in a separate file. This does kind of balloon up your file size quite a bit, but if you're having some issues, you can save caches for all these things so you get better results with Cineware. And again, that's now in S22, a per project setting and not a preferences one size fits all for all your projects setting. Anyways, okay, so one of the things that we can do in Cinema is create layers. And layers are helpful for a bunch of things, and they also are useful for Cineware. So this is kind of like a 1-2 punch trick. So you learn it once, and it helps you in both Cinema and also in Cineware. Now, I have this landscape object here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on it, and I'm going to choose Add to New Layer. And I'm just going to name this Landscape so I know what it is. But you know, the purpose of layers initially in Cinema 4D is to give us a bunch of different control over, you know, we could turn on and off the animation or the materials or whatever. We have a lot of just settings that we could look at really quickly here. So if I click on the solo icon here, then I'm soloing the landscape in both the viewport and my object manager. So it cleans things up, and it's like a great housekeeping tool. And also, as you saw, super, you know, simple and easy to do. And I'm also going to go to my triangle, right click, add to new layer, call this triangle. And then now I have the triangle on its own layer. And that didn't work for some reason. That's curious. So I'll right click these objects, and then I will add them to the layer triangle and see if that gives us better results. Yeah, that works. Sometimes when I just add a null, it doesn't bring things over, but a few times it seems like it did. So that's an interesting thing there. So what I'm going to do, you know, if I just bring this over into After Effects right now, it's not going to see this because I need to save it first. And that sounds like a stupid thing to point out, but I can't tell you how many times I go back. I'm used to like dynamic link in Premiere. We don't need to save, you know. So you go back over in After Effects and you expect these instant changes, and that's not the case. I have to actually do my command S-ing business to save this before this shows up. Now I could go ahead and double click, and I'll go into my Cinema 4D files, and I'll go into this layers and external compositing thing, and then I can make a comp out of it. And so then I have my project here, and I can do some further fiddling. So if we have layers set up, and I'll just go take this to OpenGL so we have a cleaner view here. If I have layers set up in my C4D project when I bring it in, then this Cinema 4D layers checkbox will be available for checking. And so I can check it and then choose set layers. And then you'll notice that I created 2 layers moments ago, landscape and triangle. And then in the process of going into Cineware, it creates this other layer that's items not on layers, which is really cool. So I can look at that, which is in this case just the guy. So I didn't create a layer for him, but he's the only thing that I didn't create a layer for, and then so he's here. So I could see just the landscape, for example. And there you go. Now, this is more than just a cool organizational tool or a visibility thing, because when I bring this over, I have this alpha channel that I can use. It's almost like an object buffer. So I can use this, you know, like let's say if somebody else on my team is rendering something, or I'm rendering something in Cinema and it's busy, I can still take this Cineware file over and start using this to build my color grade, or I could start using this to build, you know, using this as a mat to start building out my scene. And so, yeah, there are some issues maybe like the materials don't come across perfectly or whatever, but there are benefits to using this. And so like, for example, the triangle, if I want to bring this over and start, you know, doing some kind of luminance stuff on this, making this glow and whatnot, I have that triangle. One little gotcha though, if I click on items not on layers, so I have this guy, you'll notice that I can see his feet. But in Cinema, we can't see his feet. Did I have this set up to save? No, okay. Good. So if I render this really quickly, you can see that his feetsies are in the water and like his ankles are getting chopped off by the water. So this is not really like an object buffer. So be aware of that. It's not a perfect object buffer, but in some cases, like in the landscape, it would be an object buffer. It's perfect. So just be aware there's not obscuration from other layers because we're just seeing the object itself, but it can still come in handy there, which is nice. Let's see here. Oh, this is what I was going to show you. So, you know, I keep talking all this week about how I don't know tons about Cinema 4D and I feel like an amateur. It's just such a big world. You know what I mean? It's like I'm like quarantine's finally done and I'm leaving the house and it's just like a huge world. It's overwhelming. There's like all kinds of stuff. So I made this landscape object and at the time I was thinking, well, I don't know how to texture these things separately. Like I don't know how to texture the water separately than the rocks. I eventually figured it out. So, you know, that's good. But at the time I didn't know. So I thought, well, I'll just create a plane and then I'll have the plane be at sea level and then I'll just have that be my water because then I can just put the reflection on the water. But if I save this and then go back over into my After Effects stuff, I'll turn off my layers and I'll just turn off layers there. So I'm just looking at everything. You can see that like for some reason that plane makes it so that my geometry doesn't look right at all. Like it's a little bit too high maybe. And so it's like clipping this quite a bit. So this is what it looks like in Cinema and this is what it looks like in Cineware. It's not exactly accurate. So I could go back and fiddle with the water a little bit more, but just be aware that, you know, sometimes there are these tricky things. So this is where the AEC workflow would come in handy. To get to the AEC workflow, I can go to my render settings. And then for this, I have to enable save. And then once I enable save, I can come down to the compositing project file and I can check save and then I can save the project file. So what the project file does, and make sure you want to include 3D data, that's going to bring over the cameras and lights into your After Effects project that it creates. So then when you're done rendering this, if you've saved the AEC here, or you click the save project file if you want to do it that way, manually save it, then when I bring in the AEC file, when I import it into After Effects, it's going to bring over it's going to make a composition for me, and it's going to bring over my lights and cameras and external compositing tags that we'll look at in a second, and that's just going to be created for me automatically, which is really cool. So I'm just going to close that out for right now. Okay, let's talk about the external compositing tags very quickly. You'll notice that if I go over into After Effects and I have this project, I can extract the scene data. And when I do that, I get the cameras and lights that are in the scene. And in yesterday's webinars, I mentioned that it's difficult to get animation over from lights. I might have said that because I thought that was the case, that you can't bring in animated lights. And I was wrong. You can't bring in animation data from the align to spline tag, and we'll look at a solve for that, a fix for that in just a second, a workaround. But I do have two lights in the scene, and they come over with their keyframes, as you can see here. Maybe I'll just solo the lights, and there you can see the lights kind of moving around this motion path. So again, if you remember, if you were there yesterday, we could then use this motion path in DAO or particular or whatever to create geometry or particles or whatever we want to do. So all of that's here. But notice really quickly, we have two lights and a camera in our scene, and that's it. Two lights and a camera. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this. I'm going to go back to Cinema 4D. And what I did is I created a null where this triangle is. And what I wanted to do is use that as the emitter point for particular in After Effects. So what I need to do to have this show up is add a tag. So with this selected, I'm going to go to tags, render tags, and then I'm going to go to external compositing. And that's all I have to do other than save it. I forget that all the time, save it. And then once I save it, then I could go back into After Effects, bring it in. And now when I extract this, you'll see that it's created that null for us. That's all we had to do is just apply that external compositing tag. And I should say that this works in the AEC workflow as well. So this is what the AEC project would look like if we were to um, export that out there as well. And then I have this particular null that's exactly where my triangle should be. And so I could emit particles from this spot. Later, I added some camera movement. And then because the null moved in 3D space, the particles lock onto the triangle the whole time. And it's a really cool workflow. One thing I just remembered that I neglected to mention earlier, if I go into my save settings here, typically, you can't, if you don't save out the image, then you can't save a compositing project file, because the After Effects project file, the AEC, points to the renders. That's the whole objective. But if I fake it out and I say, yeah, I'm going to save it, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, actually not going to save it. But what I can do here is actually click Save Project File and force it to save out an AEC. And you might be wondering, well, why would I want to do that? Because if I do that, then I can save out the 3D data. I can save the cameras and the lights and the stuff with the external compositing tags without actually having to render anything if I just temporarily am dishonest and tell it that I'm going to save and I don't. So that's just like a little thing there. Okay, so we talked about our null. We got that through the external compositing tag. Let's talk about Multipass. Multipass is one of the best features of Cineware as well, and that allows us to use different passes, different render passes in Cineware. And let me show you how that works. I have my reaching guy here, my guy that's reaching. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a tag. I'm going to go to tags render, not external compositing, but just regular compositing. So it's a little confusing because we're compositing this externally, and then there's external compositing, but okay, I'm just going with it. So I'm going to select this tag on my reaching guy, and then make sure I'm in my attributes manager so I can see what's going on. And then there's this object buffer tag. And what this will do is it will take whatever object this tag is applied to, and it will create a luminance mat with it. So this guy here will be all white, and then the background will be all black. And so then I could take him and have him isolated and color correct him or apply whatever I want to just to him, which is really, really helpful. So I'm going to click enable, and there aren't names for the buffers. So I can't go in and be like, this is the guy buffer. It's just an object buffer, and I could pick a number. So I'm going to right click on my triangle shrine, go to tags, render, and do a compositing tag there as well. And I'm going to enable object buffer 2. So 1 is the guy, 2 is the shrine. And what I need to do also to enable this is go into my render settings again, turn on Multipass, and then I need to go to Multipass and turn on object buffers. And the first one is object buffer 1, but I got 2. So I need to go back to Multipass and turn on object buffer 2. So I need to change this to 2. So we're spitting out object buffer 1 and object buffer 2. And now I can close this, and I'm going to save this. Now I could go back to After Effects yet again, and I'm just going to delete this and start over so I don't have any kind of weird issues from, I don't know, leftover stuff. I don't know. Just to be sure. It might still work. I don't know. But just to be safe, here we go. So I bring this over, and I still have my water object turned on. Oh, that bothers me, whatever. But you'll notice that, our Cinema 4D layers thing is enabled. We can check that if we wanted to, but our multipass stuff is still grayed out. What's the deal? Well, if my renderer is set to software or OpenGL, I can't use multipass. So multipass stuff is only available in one of the standard renderers. So I'll just do standard draft. And once I do that, then all of a sudden the world is my oyster. And I could go to Cinema 4D Multipass, enable it, click Set Multipass, and then from here, I can pick any of the passes that I would like to use. And you'll remember from moments ago when I was whining about object buffers not being able to be named, but in this dropdown, they're not even numbered. So the top one is number 1, so I'll choose that, click OK, and then I'm seeing this guy. And notice this is not like the layer because his feetsies are chopped off because they're in the water. So this is an actual alpha channel of this guy, or a luminance channel, I should say, an object buffer of this guy. Now, we're also getting some transparency here because of the scene. I might not want that. I might want everything to be black and then this guy to be white. That could cause some issues. So what I can do is right click on my clip and go to interpret footage, main, and force it to ignore the alpha channel. And then I have a beautiful object buffer. I could set multipass and change this to the second object buffer if I wanted to. There's my triangle. And so, I'm showing you these tricks and it's like, oh, cool, there's a triangle object buffer, blah, 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 whatever. But the thing that's the real takeaway here is that we can very quickly, without rendering anything, bring object buffers into After Effects. We can start our composite, we can do tests, check and see how things are going to work. I might want to go with this guy and maybe I want to brighten him up, or I want to add glow to him, or I want to recolor him or something. And I want to just see if that'll work. I don't have to go through the process of rendering out everything in order to do that. I could just bring in the C4D file, use Cineware and Multipass and make that happen. So again, if you're using simple projects or whatever, you're just doing a simple like text thing or just a simple MoGraph thing, then yeah, maybe Cineware is like the be all end all solution for you. And you can just, use the renderer, set it on final, and away you go. You do your final renders from Cineware, and that's fine. I'm not judging that workflow at all. But for more complex scenes where you're going to take, hours to render or something like that, the Cineware workflow might not be that helpful to you, but you can still take advantage of all the stuff here because of multipass and layers. Okay, let's, let me show you a couple other tricks with Cinema 4D and this whole workflow. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna show you this baking thing. Where's baking? Do some baking. So I mentioned, I'm just going to start from scratch here. I have this helix here, and I have this light, and I want the light to follow the spline and kind of like zip, 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 zip up it, zip up it, zip up it. That doesn't sound like the right way to say that. I'm going to drag the helix into the spline path, and I'm going to go to the beginning, set a keyframe for position, go to the end, and set this to 100%. Click the keyframe again, and now we have this animation of this light going up this spline. A little too fast, but whatever. So if we were to now take this into Cineware or bring the C4D file into Cineware, we would get nothing. We would get a light that doesn't move. If we were to take this into an AEC file, then we would get nothing, a light that doesn't move. And that's because the movement, the position data, the animation is all happening on this tag. And that doesn't come over into After Effects. There's no tags in After. So if we're clicking on the light, there's no position data. There's no position keyframes and no rotation keyframes, nothing. It's just all happening on this tag. So the way that we can use this and get this spline into After Effects is by what's called baking the animation. And there's a lot of ways to do this. And I actually, truth be told, scoured the internet for a bunch of different methods for doing that. There's like a method where you go into the function side of this and you could bake the objects there. And that has different options than if you were to go to object and then you were to bake the object here. And none of the settings and none of the options worked reliably for me in the test that I did. But what did work is to go to File, Export, our old buddy FBX, if you were here on Tuesday. So I can export the FBX here, and I want to make sure and choose all these like animation tracks, bake all frames, and then I could click OK, and then I'm just going to go ahead and just close this, and then I'll create a new project, and then I could just do File, Open, and then I can navigate to this baking.fbx, Bring that in. Okay. And we don't have the spline, but we didn't want the spline. We wanted the animation data to be baked into the light, and bada boom, that's what we have. Motion path and everything. So now this Cinema 4D file, if we were to save this and create a C4D file, this Cinema 4D file is ready for Cineware, is ready for AEC, and then we can take this into DAO and particular and all those things we talked about yesterday, and create some magic with this because that's keyframe data. One other thing that I want to show you just real quick before we get to the fun stuff. I mean, this kind of is fun stuff. No, it's not. I can't even pretend that it is, but it's helpful. It's helpful stuff. But one of the other things that I ran into is that I often wanted to create an object buffer on part of an object. So here, for example, I have one of our astronaut guys, and I was playing around with the front mask of his helmet. And I was thinking, it'd be really cool if I could do X, Y, Z. I don't know. I was just kind of testing some stuff out, and I wanted to get some reflections on his using like CC lens and After Effects and other stuff, just kind of seeing what I could do or whatever. So I just wanted an object buffer that was just this thing. And you can't do that. It's all just one mesh. And so you can't create an object buffer that's just one thing. So I selected this, and then I right click on this mesh and I choose split. And then that makes an object that's just these polygons. And now I can create an object buffer on just this section. And there's that. And if you're already a Cinema 4D Pro, you already probably knew that, but just another thing to do, another way to play with this. I'm gonna head back over into After Effects, and let's talk about compositing. I'm going to first start by looking at Optical Glow. Optical Glow is a tool that's in the VFX suite, and it applies glow to stuff. And as a trainer, when I'm trying to tell people about Optical Glow, it can be a tough sell because the glow in After Effects, the native glow in After Effects, has just been a standard for a very, very long time. It's very useful. People know how to do it, and there's some tricks to fiddling with it. And once you get used to it, it's kind of like your old buddy that you use all the time. But once I started playing with Optical Glow, I was sold. My friend, I was sold because it does more, it's easier to use, and it just looks a billion times better. So I have this example from Trapcode DAO. What I did is I took this map, the nebula map that we've been looking at this week, and I used it as a texture in DAO here. And so I wrapped it around the mesh. And so here's what it looks like without the material, just this kind of like gorgeousy mesh with ambient occlusion and everything. Dude, that's just, I don't know what it is about this that's so pleasing to my eye, but I feel like I could just look at this all day long. It's just like really gorgeous. And also too, this isn't lagging. This is actually the speed that the render is. I wanted this kind of like slow, gorgeous thing, and it renders remarkably fast considering how much geometry is there and how it's just kind of like, deforming upon itself. But if I go back and I pick this map again, you can see what we have. And what's kind of cool is that I had it stretch the map. So then there's like these stars in the map, and they get stretched. And then I animated the scale of the texture. So then it kind of creates these weird like little trails of things, like that they start kind of going around. I don't know. That's really gorgeous. And again, because the ambient occlusion, that's just gorgeous as is. But I want to add Optical Glow, and in the process kind of show you some of the magic here that we're going to get into when we look at Supercomp in just a second. So it adds glow, no big deal. Probably what you're used to. It takes the stuff and makes it brighter, makes the brights brighter and such. But there's some really great options here that turn this into a different tool for me. And I'm sure there's probably ways to hack the originals like stylized glow and get this too, or similar effects. But it's just so much easier. And there are also a couple options that aren't there. But if I increase highlights only, then I'm only highlighting the brightest parts of the image. So the glow is not getting applied to my shadows. And so you can create these like really cool techie looks. I mean, even just that is pretty dope, right? I mean, that's I for me, that's a special moment right there, folks. That's really beautiful. But it gets better. What I can do here is, let's increase this more so we just have some more posterizing there, just the brightest parts. I can increase the vibrance, and so that these little highlights have a little bit more pizzazz to them. So there's before, still cool, but then we can make them vibrant, and that's starting to be extra cool. I could colorize this. So I'll click on this color swatch, take this to a pink color, and like, oh dear, this is getting exciting. I'll go to inner tint, and maybe I'll take it to like a light bluish color and further fiddle with the colors there. So now we have this kind of really gorgeous thing there. And now as these lights spin around, they really have attention called to them, which is gorgeous. But not done yet. What I could do is change this to increase glow only. So I'm only getting the stuff that has glow applied to it, and I could get rid of the other stuff. But what's cool is it's not an on-off switch, it's a percentage slider. So as I increase this, we're getting rid of the darkest parts of our image, and then what we have left is this Kubrickian magic. And it's just gorgeous. It's just gorgeous. I would like stand at City Hall with a megaphone defending the gorgeousness of optical glow. And you'll see that, like, because we have,
Kubrickian. That's my new
say what?
phrase. Kubrickian.
Yeah, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you know what I mean. You get it.
Lovely.
But thank you. I appreciate that. But I can also decrease highlights only and actually animate this so that some of that detail comes back over time. And that creates like this beautiful thing. So now we have this like faceted, gorgeous, I'll take up glow only a little bit more. And then we have this gorgeous like glass thing. Oh, I just love this. And so, again, it's a commercial for the tools. Knowing the features and knowing what they do, it's not just about like a one-stop shop. It's not just like, oh, I use Cineware, I don't use Cineware, I use AEC, or I use Optical Glow, or whatever. It's about using the tools in conjunction with each other and using their strengths, and then you can do magic things. Oh my goodness. Love it. Anyways, so there's that. We're going to dig into Optical Glow a little bit more. Oh, one thing. So in the last session that we had this morning, was it Aurelio? Somebody saved my life, and I want to publicly say thank you and praise them because I knew something. So one of the things that you do, if I want to export Multipass stuff, I go to Multipass, and there's all kinds of stuff that if I want to spit out, I could spit out the depth information, which creates a luminance map of the depth in our scene. So things that are closest to the camera are white, things that are furthest from the camera are black, and in between. And we could use that for cool stuff. That's how I created the fog. And so we can go in and create all kinds of cool multipasses. But when we save this, I always use OpenEXR, because OpenEXR is such a powerful format. You can store all of these data. You can store all the multipass stuff inside of the EXR. And what I learned is that from Aurelio, bless your whole heart and soul, is that if you save the AEC compositing file, it's mutually exclusive with the multi-layered EXR. So if you save the AEC, then you're going to have to save out an OpenEXR sequence for every single multipass. So a whole sequence for just depth, a whole sequence for, I don't know, whatever else you have. But if I deselect this, then I can enable a multi-layer file for OpenEXR, and then all that data comes into just one file. So again, I'm going to show you what this looks like, but just remember, they're mutually exclusive, the AEC and the multi-layer OpenEXR. So what I recommend doing is just, and actually too, if you're saving an OpenEXR, it saves RGBA data. It saves the regular pretty pass. So you don't have to save the regular image at all. Just save the multipass image. So I could deselect this, just save the multipass image, it's OpenEXR. And then I don't have to lose my AEC because I can just save the project file right here. So I click save the project file here to save the AEC and then output a multipass OpenEXR. That is gold. That is gold. That is gold. So here's what this looks like in real life. I have a single layer EXR that I just rendered since the last session, so I can show you what this is like here. So here's just one frame, and this is the RGB version. This is like the main render. And then here is the multipass render. And you can see that they're no different because the RGBA pass is automatically put into the multipass render. But the magic here is if I go to the 3D channel effects in After Effects, and I apply this extractor, and you can see like the letters like EX and R are all caps, get it, because of EXR. So then I apply extractor to this, and it can get weird on you initially, but that's because there's so much data here. So I can click on, this is a little bit tricky, but I can't click like right here, that doesn't work. It doesn't do anything. You actually have to click in the channels area. So click in that channels area, then you get this pop-up that does not, that opens it really, it opens at inopportune times. It pops up occasionally and it's annoying. But look at this. I go to my layers, and this is just one file. And actually, just to prove my point here, I gotta click OK and then click away to get rid of it. It's annoying, but okay. So I have just one image sequence here, just one image, just one file. But if I go to my layers, you can see all this stuff here. So I can click depth, click OK, and then it doesn't go away and you click OK, you have to click away from it. But then there's my depth pass. And then I could click this again and I could go to object buffer 1 and then click OK and then click away from it. And there's my object buffer 1. So all of my object buffers, my reflection maps, my illumination maps, depth map, everything is stored in this one image sequence, which is great. Great, 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 great. So I can just duplicate this and then change whatever channel I want to extract. And that's like a really great way to work. Oh, just for the super compositing nerds in the crowd, for whatever reason, these EXRs, and maybe Darren, you have some science on this. When I click in my, let's say I go to my depth map, I click on depth map and with it highlighted, I click on this and I look at my info panel and it says depth not available, which is kind of weird to me because the depth is like right there. I'm literally staring at the depth right there. And I know in the old workflows before OpenEXR became a thing, you use RPF or RLA, and the depth information would be there, but for some reason the depth is just not available here. Like I don't have like the specific numbers of where this is in Z space, and that's kind of frustrating. But I don't know how to do that. But anyways, just something.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chad. I'm not sure either.
Okay, good. Well, that makes me feel like a little better myself. If you don't know the answer, then we're all in trouble. So let's look at this this big comp and how I set this up, this big final deal here. And we got plenty of time to dig into this. So if you're curious about any aspect of this that I didn't cover about, like, I don't know, I initially was thinking that we would create this whole project in this webinar. That's a little ambitious, but we can cover any of this kind of stuff if you're interested. But I really want to get into Supercomp because Supercomp is this amazing tool for compositing, and it's new. And so there's some interesting things that you have to do to make this work. So here's the pre-Supercomp comp. You'll notice that I went in and I went into like I created pre-comps. So I had my scene here, and then I duplicated the layer, I had the object buffer, and then I set this up using Illumimat, and then I had to pre-comp it. And the reason I had to pre-comp it is that Supercomp, Supercomp is like this new effect. It's kind of like Cineware. Like they're just kind of new on the scene, and I think the developers are still kind of trying to process how people are going to use them, what features to focus on, and that kind of stuff. It's just kind of like this very new creation. Kind of reminds me of like in the 70s, like there was like this story, I don't know if you guys remember, there was like this like mafia Don, this guy like the super high up in the mafia, and he had this kid that was like, you know, really good at like standardized testing, and so it got a lot of press because of that. And so I have a photo of it here if you it doesn't sound familiar. But so Supercomp and Cineware are kind of like this super baby that, you know, there's like a lot of power here, but it's still kind of in its infancy. So
very nice.
Thank you.
Question
Thank
for
you.
you as well, Chad. That's very excellent. That's a nice aside.
Thank you.
A couple of quick questions for you. That's a question from Ricardo. Would you, just in the way you're setting up the scene, would you pre-compose and copy the camera into the pre-comp and then link it back into the original?
I would not do that because this is the AEC workflow. So when you bring in the AEC, I'll show you that in just a second here. Yeah, I'll show you that in just a second. But when you bring in the AEC, it's going to automatically have all of these layers. And so I would kind of use that as like my master comp, and everything's going to be rendered already. So like this file with this left guy, he's already rendered. So he doesn't benefit from having a camera in there unless you're going to do something else to him, maybe.
I think Ricardo's talking about the depth buffer for it.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so if you're going to the depth buffer, let's see here. I have the haze already set up here. And what I did was I have my landscape and that, and then I have this solid here. And the solid is being masked by the multipass, the depth pass or whatever. But again, the camera data is already there. It's already animating because it's rendered. So you don't have to do anything with the depth pass or any of the passes. Does that answer your question? I feel like maybe I'm not getting the question.
Just whilst you're there as well, this might be something you can come back to if you've got time after the Supercomp bit. But Matthias has asked, could you show your water material because it's got a nice abstract look and it looks almost painted.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so this is, yeah, I can show it. It's not going to be that embarrassing. It's going to be a little embarrassing. Okay, let me go into the final project file that I used for this deal here. And it's kind of an interesting thing. I think it was interesting. I mean, I learned quite a bit. I think that this is loading. Yeah. It's kind of a bigger project, so it takes a minute to, there we go. So what I did is I created the landscape and then on the landscape object, I increased the sea level to kind of create these flat areas. And then what I did is I created this landscape material. And on that material, I went in and I created a layer shader. And I'm talking about this as if like I know what I'm doing. This is like, I barely got this to work. This is like bubblegum and duct tape. I barely understand what's going on. But I created like a water texture, and this is kind of like a bluish kind of texture here. Then I created a terrain mask, and this is really where the magic happens. So I created a terrain mask that masked the layer on top of it, and so that the water cuts off at a certain height. And so then on the top of that, I have these two, rocks and a bitmap. And so these things only show up above the mask because they're masked, because it's set to be a layer mask. And then the warbliness, I didn't really know what to do. So what I did is I used a displacer object and I created a field, a box field. And then on the displacer, I created like a little shader, like a noise shader that animates a little bit. So it's just, you could see this is my water. But I didn't want my landscape to be warbly. So then I used a field and just a really tiny, tiny thin field that only like covered like the water surface. And like that's how I was able to make the water warble. So it's a combination of the material, which is just kind of like a mirrory thing, and then the displacer object. There's probably a lot of different and better ways to do that, but that's the thing that I did for that.
Fantastic, thank you.
Okay. Okay. So if we go back to our big comp here, and I have everything pre-comped and everything ready, this is when you'd want to use Supercomp, because I'm just going to delete Supercomp. Supercomp, a lot of people when it first came out were kind of confused by it a little bit, and they were kind of like, oh, well, it has effects in it that I already have, and that's not the point. The point of Supercomp is it's an integration engine. It blends things together. That's its job. That's its only job. So if you want to make something sparkle or look sexy or whatever, do it outside of Supercomp. If you're going to apply some kind of blur or effect, use After Effects tools for that. It's not meant to replace anything that's there already. All the effects that are in Supercomp have one purpose, and that is to bring everything together. So I'm going to select all of the things that I want to composite together, and I'm going to go to Effect, RGVFX, Supercomp. And for those of you that aren't as familiar with Supercomp, I'm going to explain it. My apologies, know what this is about, but it's a really weird thing, kind of like DAO and Mirror. It's just an unconventional tool, so it's worth kind of talking about a bit. So what it does is it creates a solid layer on top of everything, and it applies Supercomp to that. So if I were to change a layer that's not in Supercomp, it wouldn't show up here necessarily, because this is the new standard, because it's kind of putting everything into this. This is, again, a composite engine. We have our layers here, and we notice that there's 8 bits per channel in our project, but in Supercomp, we operate at 32 bits per channel. So the colors, the glows, everything that we're doing here is really high end, but we don't have to slow our whole project down by changing it to 32 bits per channel. I think it's not like a really sexy thing to say, but to me, that's like one of the greatest benefits of Supercomp. One of the side benefits of Supercomp is this staying in 8 bits per channel, processing in 32 bits per channel in Supercomp. So let's say, for example, I'll go to my triangle. I'll drag this up here. Drag it up. And I'll go ahead and click on this little plus icon. And you can see I get this fun little spinny wheel of effects that I can add to my triangle. Auto save. I'm going to apply optical glow, for example. And then I will increase the amount and the size to make it all, spazzy. Oh, also, I like to usually use this on a separate monitor because I'm seeing the view here of the layer, but then to see the results in the final composite, I need to look here in the actual viewer. So that way I can look at the layer and the whole composite. And then I want to actually roll off the highlights so that they're not, because like, as you zoom in here, let me actually take this back to 0 so you can see. But as I take this down to 0, we start getting this kind of like weird glow. And, that's cool for other glow effects, but, optical glow is too cool for that business. So we can increase that and then get all that beautiful fall off back the way that we want it, which is magical. Now, you might be saying, well, why don't you just apply optical glow to the effect before you get here? But the thing is that, again, the point of Supercomp is to make all these layers blend together. All these layers speak to each other. So After Effects is the butt of a lot of jokes in the visual effects community because it's layer based. And using layers, it's really hard to get things to integrate and composite really well. And so Supercomp solves a lot of that stuff. And let me show you, I'll go to particular here. And again, here's the smoke that I created in particular. and I could go and let's say I'll do a light wrap. And then as I increase the light, I'm going to go over the top here so you can just really see what's going on. But you could see that, and this might not show up across the webinar. I'll make this a little bit bigger. But you could see now what the layer looks like on its own. And you're seeing that this layer is being affected, that the light is wrapping through the particular smoke. Another thing that we could do, and this is like a great thing that I do all the time when I'm compositing smoke, especially. I love the way this looks. I'm going to add a blur behind effect. So it's going to take the stuff behind it and then blur it into itself. And this is kind of, again, Supercomp in a nutshell. It's taking objects from different layers and bringing it into all layers. So now as I move in time here and I see some of this smoke, you could see that sometimes, the glow is just unobstructed. And then other times you'll see that the glow is there, but it's not as vibrant as this because the smoke's on top of it. And then you'll see stuff like this where it's like, is the glow on top of the smoke or is the smoke on top of the glow? I don't know. And that's the magic of Supercomp right there in a nutshell, is where it can make objects feel like they're really existing in a whole complete world, and that the layer structure of After Effects is kind of like overridden a little bit. We could bring stuff from the foreground into the background, stuff from the background to the foreground, and it's all magic. I can go to like my background, my landscape here. Maybe we'll add some like diffusion maybe. And like we're kind of like softening the lens. I'm going to overdo it just so you can kind of see what's going on, but it's bringing all these colors into the background. And if I were to bring in like a neon green object right here, that neon green would then bleed into everything else. I don't have to come back to Supercomp and say, oh, by the way, change this. I just have to add that green layer to my Supercomp, and it becomes part of this blender, this smoothie of composited goodness where these layers just kind of all work together. I could look at my guy on the right here, and I could add some light wrap to him, and I'll bring that up quite a bit just so you could see it. And I'll take down the size a little bit, and it's kind of hard to see. I can click this little like on and off button for this effect. So there's before the effect and then after the effect. And again, this is dynamic. If you look at his body right here, there's not very much light wrap happening. Let me zoom in extra closer. There's not much light wrap happening because there's not that much light behind him, but there is light right here. This is brighter where the reflection is. So I don't have to make masks. I don't have to separate this. This is a live dynamic thing. So like his shoulders are barely getting any light wrap, and then his body is getting a lot of light wrap. So again, I would tone that down if I were actually really doing it, but you could see that this guy, look at his legs. He looks like he belongs in this scene more than this guy. And that's what compositing is. It's just these little tiny touches that make things feel like they belong in the same world together. And I guess I'm only leaving you like 2 minutes, but there you go.
That's the distilling compositing down into the little tiny touches that make it look real. That's probably a good way of saying it.
Yeah, right?
Absolutely. I love that effect. I love the fact that you've got another layer in particular, and it's actually taking on the aspects of the glow without having to then point it to the other layers, because as you were saying, the whole concept of Supercomp is to make the layers talk to each other without having to manually do that.
Yes.
And
yes.
It's an interesting thing that the creative director at Maxon, Stu Maschwitz, has been a compositor for 20 plus years. And one of the ideas that he had to introduce this tool was to put the fun back into compositing, was his exact phrase. So all those times where you look at a shot and you think how many hours and how many pre-comps you're going to have to make, and then refer those back to each other, a lot of that effort then is automatic inside Supercomp, and that's really the whole thing, to be able to add more iterations and do stuff more quickly.
Yeah, it definitely does. Stuff like atmospherics, like smoke and fire, those things are like that's why you become a compositor, because that stuff is really fun. I mean, that's like the highlight. I mean, like color correcting, you know, it's fun too, but it's not as fun as like, you know, an explosion or something like that. But then, you know, there's so many challenges that compositing atmospherics creates, and Supercomp makes them so much easier. It's a lifesaver for sure.
Absolutely. A quick question from Michael. If you make changes in the separate comps, does it update in Supercomp? Yes, that's absolutely the case. That if you, in fact, I've got an example of that. Can I grab
Do
your
it.
screen?
Take it. It's
Let's
yours.
just switch over. Okay, change presenter, make me presenter. Here we go, show my screen. I was actually going to show a little sneak peek as well, something that we've been working on that we're going to be introducing into Supercomp in a few weeks' time. But let's just send these layers. This is like a test project I've got here. If I just select my layers and then send them to Supercomp by just going to the effects menu and choosing Supercomp. And this adds a solid into the scene and apply Supercomp onto that solid, and then opens up a panel into which you can see these layers. And a quick answer to your question, Michael, is if you change one of the elements inside the scene here, then like on the mirror plane, which is the just a model inside mirror with some textures on it, if I change the scale of that inside the comp, then it automatically updates it. But the visibility is actually taken over by Supercomp, so I can turn off the visibility completely inside my comp, and I then control it inside Supercomp itself with the visibility here. But the thing I wanted to show you was that if we, what did you call it? The official name, Chad, is the radial array of tools, but you call it the whizzy circle tools or something. I might start to call it. But if we go into, say, color correction, one of the tasks we have to do as compositors is to start kind of managing the, say, the luma levels of this object, maybe adding up some more blue in the background and making it seem like it's more fixed into the background, just as one of those many steps before we start doing the light wrap and so on. But if I replace this, the thing I wanted to give you a sneak peek on was this button here, the match background, which then does a large amount of that for you, and then you can continue to then mess around with those values and then change them depending on the settings that you want to do. But it takes those pixel values which are directly behind it and then applies those. So if we did the same thing on the destroyed in the middle distance there, use color correction and then clicked match background, that also takes those color values. So it starts to then save you time when you're trying to put those color values into those different objects or those layers. And also, oh yes, here we are. There's something else which is quite useful. If you click on a layer, you can choose the gamma at which you are operating. And in the current shipping version, you can choose between log, linear, and video, RGB. But if you wanted to, you could then dial in from this version that's coming in shortly, a whole range of different gamma options, so that if you've got different renders at different, in different spaces, then you can then render those in the entire comp. And in fact, you can then output from the entire comp. Let's choose this. Output gamma can also be controlled, so depending what your different layers can be at different gamma settings, and then you can have the whole thing output, say at log if you're staying at log for doing grading or doing various different production workflows down the line. But just wanted to give a couple of those little sneak peeks, things that are coming soon. Woo. Fantastic. Great. So, I mean, you've covered so much stuff in the last 3 days, Chad. This has been really fantastic, and it's been great to just open a window on your on your process, if you like. So, thank you again for this.
Awesome. Yeah, totally my pleasure. It's great to be here. Thanks everybody for showing up, all you beautiful attendees. It's great.
This absolutely. I wasn't going to forget to thank everyone. But it's well done for reminding me. Two other things that we usually ask at this point is, where can we see the previous webinars in this series? And the trick is to have a look at this PDF. There's a link inside the PDF inside the chat section, and you can download that. We'll also add this link automatically in the follow-up email that comes automatically in the next hour or so. You'll see that email turn up, and it's got a link to the recording as well as a link to this PDF. And you can just click on the previous sessions, and that takes you through to those recordings. And we've also got some more webinars that are happening next week. Here we go. If I switch over to here, some more webinars talking about more of the topics that we've been looking at. And a great question from Ellie: is there a webinar just for Supercomp? Well, there is existing. The answer is yes. We do have resources just for Supercomp. We've got a webinar coming up in June talking about compositing in 3D and After Effects, where we touch into that. But if you wanted to look at Supercomp right now, if you go into the tutorials page of Red Giant site, so redgiant.com/tutorials, and this is how to search for stuff. Just search for Supercomp. There's a fantastic 50-minute getting started with Supercomp, which isn't just a here's the settings. This is the philosophy within Supercomp that the creative director Stu Maschwitz talks about. So this is a great one to look at. So if you wanted to see why it's useful and what those time-saving elements are, that's a great one to look at. So it's like a super tutorial, like when they do masterclasses. This is one of those because you get to look into the reasons why as well as what the different buttons do. I've just added that to the chat link, and I'll add that to the notes. Yes,
it's really. And Stu Maschwitz is like the most charming fellow in the world. He's so adorable. Like I could listen to him talk all day, every day. It's like so informative. Like man, that's a great tutorial. Great.
This is really good. And if you've got 50 minutes, fantastic. If you've got just 20 seconds to look at things, we've also got your back, because we've got a whole range of 20-second tutorials of all sorts of these different types of effects for things like, for example, in Supercomp, if you want to set keyframes, here's a little 20-second tutorial about reminding you where those keyframes are, because if you go into the interface, then every time you hover over one of those buttons, then it shows a little of those stopwatches, which lets you then add a keyframe into the effect controls panel. And we'll add a link to this as well, where we've got a whole range of those. They're 20 seconds long for a reason, because it means it's just, these are reminders, memory joggers. And these are on an open channel on YouTube. We'll send you the link too. Great. So we've overrun slightly, but hopefully you'll forgive us because of the extra things we've been able to share. But thank you for bearing with us. And thank you also to Darren for answering all those questions on the various webinars we've had this week. We appreciate that too. And thanks, Alexander, for the Boris comparison, I think. So we're going to add in different tutorials. We've had a request for different subject areas. So thanks, Arjun, for that. We'll consider that and we'll put that into the mix. But thanks all for turning up this week. And especially thanks, Chad. Thanks for sharing everything with us.
My pleasure, man. It's been great. Thank you.
And hopefully we'll have you back on some more ones. We'll definitely have you back. Spoiler alert. But yes, until the next one, please look at your email boxes, because we've got more webinars coming, and please have a look at those links where you can register for the ones that are every Monday as well. Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for the nice words, and we'll see you on the next one. Stay safe and stay healthy. All right, take it easy.
Bye.
Cheers, bye.